Did you hear, Eric?
Hear what, Stacey?
We're on iHeartRadio now.
No way.
We're totally on iHeartRadio. You have to. There's like this major thing that you have to do, like this. What is it I'm talking about? What is it I'm trying to think of? What's the word?
An approval process?
That too, but an application.
Okay.
And so not all podcasts get on iHeartRadio.
But we did.
We did. We totally did. If you go in there and you search Pop-Operation, bam, we show up.
I'm having a Sally Field moment.
Why is that?
They like us. They really, really like us, Stacey.
Yeah, so you should go there. iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio.
When the chaos of popular culture makes your brain hurt, you really need belief in the form of a transfusion of analysis and humor. It's time for a Pop-Operation. Join hosts Eric and Stacey as they dissect popular culture one bloody organ at a time. It's just what the doctor ordered.
Hello, everyone. This is Pop-Operation. I'm Eric.
I'm Stacey.
And we are going to talk about something a little touchy.
Touchy.
This week.
It makes me feel uncomfortable. Then you should go tell an adult you trust.
Yes. Look at the movie. And
that's what all these are. These are all kind of.
Yeah. So we've been kind of toying for a while with how do we kind of marry politics with pop culture? And it's just, we don't want to be that political show.
We don't want them to marry. We want them to date and maybe end up as good friends. I don't need to fucking marry him.
But so we're not doing it. Hey, it's like, or you know what? I feel sometimes that explicit rating goes to waste.
It's true.
It's because true. We don't use it enough. So fuckity fuck. That's what I have to say about that.
Happy birthday, Mother.
Yeah, if our parents were listening, they're not anymore, and they might not want to hear the show anyway, because we're not going to talk about, like today's political situation.
Yeah, we're not protesting here. I don't have a placard at all.
But there's times when pop culture addresses hot button political issues well, and then at times that it really doesn't.
So pop culture stands for popular culture. That's duh.
Yep.
But here's the thing. If you look back at the 60s, there were a lot of times that the issues of the day affected the art that came out, the popular culture, the music, the movies. We talked about 1967 and Bonnie and Clyde and all that. The deal is not that pop culture and issues happening, real life happening in current don't go together. It's just a matter of doing it well, putting them together well. There are songs in the 60s that are great that's still blowing in the wind. So a lot of folk songs at that time. There are things, Bob Dylan hit it, Joni Mitchell, they hit really good songs that were great and popular at the time, that stood the test of time, made a point, but they were also nice to listen to.
Yep.
And I think that that's kind of what we're talking about. But also this episode is we're trying to say, just because it is a real issue that is going on in the world today doesn't mean that we have to ignore it because we're pop culture and it's all about pop.
Yeah, I mean, I
bubblegum.
Personally, it's like we said in our intro, right? It's like not many people take pop culture very seriously, but we believe it's really important. It's either a mirror for us to look into, or it's some kind of aspirational, this is what we could become. And tons of sci-fi is actually very politically motivated. Much of that is, this is the future we could have, and so much of Star Trek was Gene Roddenberry's vision of what we could be as a society if we did it well. So there's a lot. I mean, even
H.G. Wells was all about what he saw as Orwell. I mean, there was a lot of that, and even for Star Wars fans, of which I am one, understand that there were political and there were other undertones in there.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's how the pop culture and serious issues come together. But again,
every once in a while, you get a movie or a show or something that is just it doesn't allude to something. It's just about that thing.
Right, but in order to be good, it needs to again, if you're going to call yourself entertainment, damn it, entertain me. So it needs to do, if it's going to be a movie, which I put, movies in the category of entertainment, then you need to entertain me, number one. And I've said this over and over ad nauseum, I'm sure. If you teach me something also, fine. But it can't, otherwise you need to be a documentary.
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on that. And that is just that, I don't want movies that make me think, but I like movies that invite me to think.
Okay.
I mean, because an invitation is different than being forced to go to. I don't want to go to school when I go to the movies. But if I see someone who's struggling with something and I'm kind of invited to go, well, what would I do in that situation? I actually appreciate that kind of stuff. That kind of makes me go, how can I apply this to my own life?
But you want it to be entertaining also. It has to be, all of the things of good filmmaking or good TV or good books or good music need to be there.
Yeah, the characters have to be interesting. The plot line has to be compelling in some way.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying.
So this is kind of like, when you talk about like the issue movie, right? This is kind of like the film version of the very special episode, right?
Blossom, a very special episode.
Different Strokes was the very special episode that freaked me out. Remember when he the pedophile was right?
Yes.
When he almost got, molested by the pedophile, and it was this creepy. If you think
about the timing of when that happened, and that was huge.
Yeah.
Again, that the timing of when that occurred was that was the 70s, and people didn't talk about that.
Yep.
I stuff I could say, but I'm going to keep to myself. Because I'm like, at that time, who was having all these great series at the time was Bill Cosby.
Oh, well.
Irony. Sorry, throwing that out there. Okay. Moving right along.
So, so sometimes,
But even Cosby had a very special episode, didn't they?
I'm sure they had to have.
They had some special episodes.
Yeah.
Would say it was one big long special
episode. So, so when I was thinking about like what's an example of a hot button movie, I remember when Philadelphia came out, Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington. The first time AIDS had really been at the center of a mainstream motion picture. And Tom Hanks even said...
Hanks was the star.
Yes. Have you ever seen The Celluloid Closet?
No, but I think I've heard of
The
that.
Celluloid Closet is a brilliant documentary. It's a little dated now because it's from the beginning of film history up until... I think the late 80s when this film was made. Right, so when you watch it now, it's like, okay, it doesn't go past the late 80s because it can't, because it couldn't tell the future. But the Celluloid Closet's all about how LGBT people were depicted in popular culture through the ages and kind of how that shaped, and it came out after Philadelphia because Tom Hanks was interviewed for that movie and he actually said, how are we going to humanize AIDS? Well, why don't we cast somebody like Tom Hanks, who's just...
He's
above
America's
reproach.
Sweetheart is who he was and is, even if you want to go down. Yeah. But that was a huge... I think that is what shocked a lot of people, is that he took it on.
Yeah.
That he did this. And again, I've talked about how British actors tend to they'll work. They'll do any job you want them to. They don't care. Whereas Americans tend to be very careful about, well, I don't know whether I'm going to do that role because what will that say about me? Blah, 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 blah.
And how will it affect the rest of my career? Well, and maybe American audiences are different from British audiences too. Maybe it's not just the actors that are different, because we might actually tank somebody's career if they do something we don't like. We might not ever go see their movie again.
It is interesting because I do have a theory about it, but that's a wormhole we don't need to go down right this second. But I will say that what Tom Hanks did in taking on this character in Philadelphia was say, you're not going to pigeonhole me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do this because this is important to me. And he did it brilliantly. But I think it needed a lovely movie. It had to have a big ticket actor in it to be what it was.
Yeah, it's certainly not the first movie that was ever made about AIDS.
Correct.
But it was the first movie at that scale that was seen by that many people.
It had to have that kind of actor.
Yeah.
I believe.
And Denzel was there to be the slightly homophobic lawyer who half the audience could kind of side with, because they weren't really sure how they felt about gay men who had sex with each other and contracted AIDS.
Because he had all the cliches to say so that you could dispel them. Somebody has to bring those up, because that's where the audience is.
And really what I think made Philadelphia such a big success is it didn't try to preach at you. No. It just told a story about a sick man who had a partner who cared deeply about Antonio Banderas, before anybody knew who that was, played his boyfriend. Joanne Woodward played his mom, and they decided not to do the thing where he was estranged from his parents because he was gay. They just said, you know what? Why not have parents who love their kid? Those
because
exist.
That's not what it was about.
And that's not what it was about. But also you needed to see a mom mourn the loss of her son too soon, and it just, watching Tom Hanks wither away and die from this disease and being treated so terribly by and it was all kind of the structure. It was all about this employment discrimination case. Right. It just humanized an issue, and it actually depoliticized AIDS for a lot of people.
Correct. It humanized it was the big thing, though. It did depoliticize to an extent, but what it needed to do was pro-humanize, which is what it did. Yes. Again, with these big actors, especially Tom Hanks. I think that was huge. But
rather than come out with a whole bunch of speeches about how people with AIDS are people too, and blah, 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 it was a show, not tell. And I think that's probably going to be, we might have gotten, that's probably going to be something that what did you learn today, Eric? That might be one of the things that we kind of learn as we go through this, is that those hot button issue movies that do it well, they just tell you a story and they don't beat you over the head with an agenda.
Yeah, I think that is huge. That is good filmmaking, is what that is, or TV shows, or even plays, frankly. But that is what good filmmaking for sure is showing, not telling. And it's entertaining. But at the end of the day, and again, by entertaining, that doesn't mean that it was a song and a dance and we all clapped and hummed along. What that means is you walked away feeling like you had a good experience. You may have learned something. It may have been sad, whatever.
Or you had a good cry.
Correct.
Some people go to the movies for a good cry. Some people do that. Some people do that. And it's okay, Stacey. It's okay that they do.
So anyway, what else? So that was AIDS, hot button topic, done really well, Philadelphia. Another one, and this goes back. This is old school. Yeah. But even then, this tells you that good filmmaking is good filmmaking whenever the bloody hell you make it. On alcoholism. Now, a lot of movies have come out about alcohol. Yeah. People with alcoholism. Days of Wine and Roses. Right. Is another one with that was in the 60s with Jack Lemmon and somebody's name I can't remember right now. But then The Lost Weekend, though, was one of the first. Ray Milland, whom I adore almost everything. He was in Dial M for Murder. He's just one. He was in Major and the Minor. Love, love, love. Ray Milland. This was a different thing for him. He wasn't America's sweetheart, but he was a good guy. He always played the good guy. Yep. He was usually the best friend a lot of times. He was a star of this, and he's just your average, regular Joe.
With a drinking problem.
And you just kind of see him go through what happens when you're an alcoholic. Well, you lose your job, you lose your family, your life goes to hell. But it was, again, show, don't tell. It wasn't a lecture.
From his point of view. Now, interesting little trivia about The Lost Weekend. Based on, I think, a book. There was some source material that The Lost Weekend was based on. And the book, if it was a book, led you to believe that the reason this man drank so much is that he was gay and closeted. And the 40s couldn't take that.
That would have been the year.
The 40s couldn't take that in a movie. They couldn't take that in a movie. No. So they just wrote that bit out of the movie. And the truth is that, that would not have aged so well because being gay isn't something that forces you to drink. Not that gay people don't drink, but that's another topic for another day.
We know that's not true.
But also is that, what we know about addiction is that you don't necessarily have to have a reason.
Correct. And I think that that's important. And again, it comes down to the show, don't tell, is that it doesn't, I'm glad that wasn't in there because that's distracting. That would have taken away, I think, from...
Well, it's just a different movie. It's a movie about dealing with shame as opposed to dealing with addiction.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. It's a different... I just don't think it was needed. No. Because... And he was wonderful. I believe he got an Oscar. He certainly got a nod, but I think he won that year. He was... It's wonderful. It's definitely a classic to go watch. Again, you might want to have something on tap like Kimmy Schmidt to watch afterwards. It's kind of a downer.
It's tough.
But it is really, really good. But it tells you that even back in the day, they were hitting these hot button topics and they could do it well.
Yeah, they would have an issue movie. So Advise and Consent about anti-Semitism was another kind of... Yes. That was a hot button of its day. And again, a really, really good film. So we're going to talk about three. movies that we think address more than three. We're going to talk about three issues. We're going to talk about three issues.
But I also, before we get away from this, there's another one that's big now, which is immigration is a hot button topic.
Yes.
But it's been a hot button topic for whenever, I don't know, Columbus? I don't know. When did it start? But you had found this really, really wonderful new movie, if you want to talk about that, which I'm fascinated with, but I haven't seen it yet because I can't find it yet.
Yeah, it's not that new. It was like probably about 10 years old.
Is it that old?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
my bad.
It's not new. But yeah, it's difficult to find. So we didn't want to put it in our big slate because you hadn't been able to see it.
Right, but I couldn't. Yeah, it was hard to find.
Because we couldn't download it. And I wanted to rewatch it, and I couldn't because it wasn't really widely available. But it's this great movie called Maria Full of Grace. And the poster of Maria Full of Grace is this young girl looking up at what looks like a communion wafer.
That's what I totally thought it was. And I'll honest, but
when you watch the film, you realize that what she does is she's swallowing these huge packets of cocaine that are
totally different. That is
wrapped,
not what they serve at the Catholic Church.
No, that are I might have wished for that at some point. But never mind. These huge that are so tightly wrapped that they'll just pass through your system. And the idea is she plays a young girl from Colombia who works at a flower processing, they're cutting stems off flowers and sending them into buckets to go send to florists throughout Colombia. It's a crappy life. She has a crappy boyfriend. She wants to get out of there. A friend of hers says, well, I know a way to get us to America. And so she is an undocumented illegal immigrant, and she gets here via the drug trade. I mean, it's just basically the far right's nightmare situation of what immigration can be.
Right.
And they just went there, but they told it from her point of view. And so at the beginning of the movie, probably about 20 minutes into it, she's swallowing 20 packages full of coke. Her stomach is completely stretched to the brim with this stuff. On the plane ride to the U.S., one of the girls that she's with, one of the packets breaks in her system and kills her on the plane.
Sure.
And when they land, they're stuck in immigration forever. And you get the idea that they're trying to wait it out before these girls have to, they have the papers, even though they've been faked, they've been forged, to get into the country. They go to where they're supposed to go. They wait for these drugs to pass through their system. That's as nicely as I can put that.
Thank you.
And then they're like, okay, you're free to go. They don't have a place to sleep.
Right.
They don't have a job.
Nope.
They don't speak the language. But they're out of Colombia, and they feel like they've done the right thing. And it's just about their kind of, her really adventures, if you will, in this new space. It's mostly Spanish, so you do have to read the movie. But it really puts a human face on this big issue that we talk about a lot. And when we say, well, not all immigrants are illegal, and and we talk about how the racism can kind of make us make assumptions about anybody who Spanish is their first language and they're an immigrant to this country. But this is like the worst case scenario from your most conservative friend, but it's about her and it's about her perspective. And it's a fabulous movie. I wish it were more widely available.
Right. There was a film that is not as deep and dark as that, and it really just kind of touches. It's called The Perez Family.
I've heard of that.
And
Marissa Tomei.
Yes, and Alfred Molina.
Oh like him.
And Angelica Houston.
Oh, really?
They were, and they're all awesome. But it's a little bit, now it is from Cuba. These are Cubans.
Cuban immigrants.
And so it's the story of...
Played by a bunch of Italians.
It's fun.
They're all
stuff.
Italian.
Are they all Italian? Oh my gosh, they totally are. Well,
all right.
Maybe I should. That was probably a mistake. We'll just cut this out.
No, we won't.
I know.
We didn't make the movie.
But again,
if that movie were made today, though, the Cuban community would have words to say about that. They would. That's just kind of where we are.
But what this was about, it wasn't necessarily about illegal aliens. It was illegal immigrants. No, it was immigrants that did get, but it was you saw the system of when you're coming to America and going through the system of not even becoming citizens per se, but becoming legal.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. I sit and watch it and you go, I am so glad I was born here. Despite whatever.
Oh, it's a huge privilege to be...
Because it is so difficult to get in here. Illegally, certainly, but even when you're doing it legally. But anyway, again, hot button issues. again, it's a top thing is be entertaining. If you're going to put yourself in the entertainment category,
yep.
Just do it well.
Yeah, and entertainment doesn't mean you have to be having fun
that's what I'm saying.
entire time.
It just means it has to be good. It has to be good art. It needs to be good film. It needs to be good TV. Whatever it is,
be compelling.
Do it so that it's good across the board. It's not just getting your point across.
And don't be so wedded to an agenda that your fingerprints are all over that. Just tell a story and let the audience come away with it what they will. We're going to talk about one. Yeah. I'm not going to spoil it now, but both sides of this issue could come away from a particular movie feeling okay.
Right.
So we're going to talk
about three different hot button topics coming up.
You're listening to Pop-Oration with Eric and Stacey. Take a deep breath. This may sting a little.
And we are back.
This is Pop-Oration.
And we are talking about hot button topics. Stuff that can make your Thanksgiving dinner uncomfortable. More uncomfortable, I should say.
Yeah.
Because drunk Uncle Albert, what are you going to do?
Well.
So anyway, we're talking about movies, for the most part, that take on these big controversial issues, but they do it, if not usually in a unique way, if I say so. In a unique way, they do it well, it's compelling, but it still makes their point. And I think the first one I have not seen, so I can't talk about this, but I've heard a lot about it, and I do have a lot of respect for the filmmakers. And this topic is all over the place.
Yes.
And it's racism.
Yeah.
So what's the good example?
So the example that I chose, a film that and it's very recent, came out this year, that really addresses racism in a way that meets all of your qualifications, is a film called Get Out. And Jordan Peele of Key and Peele is the director of this film. And it is not a polemic about race relations. It's a horror movie with traces of comedy and sci-fi. I don't think Jordan Peele could make a movie that wasn't a little funny. Like, he's just funny.
He lives
in funny.
Key and Peele?
Yes. Oh, hysterical.
And here's my thing about what I thought part of their brilliance was in their ability to do what we're talking about. Now, I will say in Key and Peele, a lot of times the topic was race.
Sure.
But that's what they're dealing with. I mean,
they are black men living in America, so it's on their mind a lot.
But they were able to, in so many different ways, in so many different vignettes and skits, hit upon it in a different way, with a different perspective, so that it made you laugh because it was a comedy show, but it also made you think. Bloody hell, it made you think. And so... Or
just examine the double standards that we live with in our society.
Yes.
That was a big one.
Which I think, again, a white girl, that is helpful to me. I will tell you right now, I am very much, to a certain extent, entitled, because I'm privileged because of how
And the biggest privilege that comes with privilege is the ability to be completely ignorant and oblivious about your privilege.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the big things about the way that works. So, you know what? I'm not even going to try to be spoiler-free when I talk about this movie. So if you have not seen Get Out, just fast forward this, or just put pause on it and listen to it another time, because there's no way to really talk about how this film deals with racism without just kind of getting into what it's about.
I mean, come on.
So here we go. Spoilers are coming, and they're coming hard.
Rosebud is the sled. Okay.
Okay, so the setup of this movie, if you've just seen the preview, is exactly the same as Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which is a film that we just talked about a couple weeks back. Black man is going home with white girlfriend to meet her parents.
For the first time.
And she has neglected to tell her parents that she's bringing home a black boyfriend. And he's a little nervous about this.
Okay, there's your plot. There's your
setup. Right?
Yep.
Now, what kind of happens when he gets there is that these parents are super duper liberal. They just don't blink an eye. They embrace him. It's so nice to meet you. What's your name?
See, I'm already suspicious at this point.
Right?
Just throwing that out.
And you should be. And, at one point, the biggest chuckle that it got for me is, and by the way, the parents are Catherine Keener and Bradley Whitford from The West Wing. Play the parents. I didn't
realize that.
Yes, play the parents.
Catherine Keener is a 40-year-old German. The I'm sorry. Yeah, virgin. It's the word I was looking for.
Yes, Catherine Keener from the 40-year-old virgin and being John Malkovich.
Sorry. Oh, yeah.
Hi, Catherine. The 40-year-old German. Hashtag 40-year-old German.
That's a movie that's coming out next year.
Okay.
I don't know.
So anyway, Bradley Whitford and this young black man who is dating his daughter with his entire blessing. He's walking around and he says, I would have voted for Obama a third time if I could. And you just kind of, and the look on this kid's face is just like, okay, fine.
Trying too hard. Hashtag trying too hard.
But they're trying a little bit too hard. And you find out very quickly in this film, and here's where the big spoilers come, is that this young girl, Allison Williams, from HBO's Girls, and also played Peter Pan in the live musical version. Yeah. Allison Williams, Brian's daughter, plays their daughter, and she has been bringing home black men on the regular for a long time.
So she's got a type.
And what happens is when she brings them home, Mom finds a way to talk them into hypnosis, and they become hypnotized. And eventually, there's this whole sci-fi dungeon in the basement where they take these people's brains out of their heads and supplant them into brains of older white people who want to be young again. And so their brains leave their bodies, and there's these young black people who have old white brains inside of them.
Poor things. I'm so sorry.
So they had a grandfather and a grandmother that they talk about, but you never reference. They also have a young black groundskeeper and a young black maid who you find out eventually are grandma and grandpa in their new young black bodies. And one of the reasons why they choose black people to do this specifically is because they believe that black people are more gifted physically, athletically, sexually, all of the gifts that black people have in terms of the physical realm, but that white people are more, and artistically is the other one that they kind of see that black people can excel there, but that they're completely disposable. And so there's this creepy scene before you figure out exactly what's going on. And the parents say to the girl, well, our big barbecue's this weekend. And the girl's like, oh, can you call it off? And they're like, no, we do this every year. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry. You're going to have to survive the barbecue. Well, they were the most awkward conversations at the barbecue. All of these older white couples are asking all of these just hugely personal questions, like, is it true that they're better in bed, black men? And they're like, and she's like, I'm really sorry. But of course, what you find out later is that they're all basically auditioning to be the one who, yes, it's an interview process. So they can take his brain out of his body and put their own brain inside. So the woman who wants to know if they're better in bed, she's there with her invalid husband who can't satisfy her anymore. It is so, it's by the time you get to the end of this thing, it is just so like, oh my God, this is what's going on. And it's bad, it's a
very different kind of horror story.
Yes.
It's funny because you look at some horror stories where it's about the homicidal maniac coming at you with an axe when you're at a camp and you go into the room that you shouldn't have gone into to begin with.
Yep.
This is completely different. This is one of those that you don't expect, and that makes it even all the more horrible.
Yeah. So it was framed as a horror movie, but most people didn't get beyond that guess who's coming to dinner kind of setup, which is enough of a setup in 2017. That's a sad commentary on society, that the setup of a 50-year-old movie still works.
Yes.
And it would still cause that much anxiety. But it just takes it in a completely different direction. And you're so wrapped up in the psychological horror of this. When he decides it's finally time to escape this house of horror and try to get out of there, he's trapped. By the way, the daughter is in on it the whole time.
Okay.
And actually...
that makes sense if she keeps bringing new
keeps
ones.
Bringing them home.
Yeah.
But at first you're like, does she know that this is... But yes, she totally works it. And she actually faked being a lesbian at one point to bring home the young girl who became grandma.
Wow.
So she has no, innate attraction to these men. So when you say she has a type, she has a victim type.
She has a job.
But she is just as bad as everyone else in the entire family. And it's just, and there are certain things that happen. The whole first half of this movie, you're like, this is weird. And then it all adds up. Like once you get this crazy, this is what's going on, that's what it's about.
Well, and that I will say from Key and Peele, some of the skits, you would sit there and go, oh my gosh, their brains are so... That's an amazing thing for somebody to think of. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm thinking here is like this. I get this.
Yeah.
I get this.
And if you listen to this, and a lot of white audiences came away from this going, Oh, come on. I mean, obviously, from a scientific standpoint, it's far-fetched. We don't know how to do brain transplants.
Right.
That's a whole other...
That's not the point. No,
but even from a sociological standpoint, they were like, that's a little much. And I tell you what, every black person I've talked to who's gone to see this movie said there are parts of it that rang so true to me from a psychological standpoint about how I am treated and viewed in this society. It really was an amazing statement about the current state of race relations, but told in this incredibly inventive, wackadoo kind of way.
That's awesome. That's an awesome...
It just
Peele's
blew my mind.
Is amazing.
Yeah. And then I have to, before I leave this is something that everyone always talks about. It's a small role, but this young man's best friend in the world is a TSA agent who is funny as hell. And he said from the very beginning, don't you go to that white girl's house. Like, he's just, he's like, he has a bad feeling about this from the very, very end. And at the end of the movie, he plays into the finale in this way that is just genius. This is one part that I will leave, just in case there's people who have not seen this movie but stuck with it despite all the big kind of reveal halfway through. I will not reveal the very end. Only that, after you see this movie, Google what the original ending was and what the new ending they replaced it with was and why. Because I think that if you had seen the original ending that Jordan Peele wrote, it would have just been all the fun, which is kind of a weird word to put to this, but because all the revelations are so crazy, it is kind of fun that way when the mystery kind of gets revealed and this is what's going on. You're like, wow. If the original ending had been in there, it would have been a little bit too much of a dose of reality.
Okay.
But the new ending, the way that it worked and the way that this TSA agent figures into the ending of the film is just brilliant.
Excellent.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
And
it's on my list.
And if you have never seen the movie, it's okay to come back into the show now. We're not going to talk about the spoilers anymore. Come on back. Come back.
So now we're going to go from the really just depressing subject of racism. Let's talk about abortion.
Yay!
So here's the deal. This is a topic that is obviously, all of these there's a reason they're called controversial. The reason we are labeling them as hot button is that they're hard to deal with because there are people on all sides. They all have at least two sides usually. This one, there are those.
And anybody who has been listening to us for any length of time or who knows us personally probably can guess which side of this debate we fall towards. I am just going to come out of the closet and say right away, I think women have a right to a safe and legal abortion.
At this, I'll be honest. I'm not going to hide behind anything and say, I'm sure I'm pro-choice. Choice is the word there. I am, pro-abortion. I don't know there's anybody's pro-abortion. It's pro-choice.
No, exactly. I've just a little bit of a personal kind of take on this. I have sat in a waiting room in my life waiting for a friend of mine who is having this procedure. No one had a party that day.
No.
That was not a happy day.
No.
It was just, I'm not going to say much more about it other than that was not a happy moment. And nobody celebrates that.
The myth that it's used as birth control is bullshit. It is not. It is always a hard thing and a decision.
Yeah, and it was a tough decision to make. It was the right decision for her at that time.
Correct.
And and it was a tough day. It was just a really hard day for everybody
involved.
Good on
you for being there for her.
Well, but it was hard. It was an enjoyable day for me, and it was not an enjoyable day for her.
And so but anyway, so.
But this is the one that I was addressing before.
Correct.
Around the movie that we're going to talk about isn't really about abortion. It feeds into the structure of the film, but it's not really about that.
We talk about show, don't tell. And this movie, it's not quite perfect, but it's very, very close to perfect, in my opinion.
In the way it deals with this issue, I think it's pretty damn near close to perfect.
It was made in 1963. It's called Love with a Proper Stranger. I stumbled on this movie 25 years ago. It was on some Saturday afternoon. I had nothing else going on. I hit some random channel, and there's this movie with Natalie Wood and
Steve McQueen.
Never heard of this movie.
Gorgeous.
It's 63. They are both in the prime of their lives. They look gorgeous. They're at the middle of the beginning of their career, so they're both beautiful. They're up and comers, and they're both on point, acting wise. It is the story of this single woman, Catholic, Italian, and she is a career girl. And apparently, we start out.
Well, by that means she has a job. She works at Macy's.
Yep. But for 1963, she was a career girl.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not saying that she wasn't looking to get married, but at the time she was, she was working outside the home.
Yep.
She did still, live with her father and brothers. But apparently about in the last month or two, she had gone to a party, met this musician. They had a one-night stand. She came away pregnant.
Yep.
She just found out. And so she goes to confront this musician, who is an out-of-work musician, Steve McQueen.
You meet him at the Union Hall trying to find...
That's right, he's looking for
scare
work.
up some gigs.
And basically the first, 3/4 of the movie takes place in one day. Yeah. I mean, it's this whole, she meets him again. She has to remind him who she is. She tells him what the deal is. He's like, oh my gosh, do I need to marry you? But I don't really want to. And she looks at him in disgust and says, no, I really just want the name of a doctor and some money to get an abortion.
Care of this.
To take care of this. And again, I don't even know if they ever used the word abortion.
They never did.
So they're in the rest of that day. So the next, the 3/4 is them.
Well, that was the first scene. Then the most of the movie takes place like a week later. They meet. He's got the money, and most of the film is that day.
That's right. It's
so
that day. I'm sorry. There is like a week, and because she had to get the money and the name of a doctor. Now, what they had to do in order is they had to, and it was all illegal.
Yes,
abortion was illegal.
Pre-Roe v. Wade.
Correct. So.
And this was not a period piece. This was a film that was made.
It was current.
A very current day.
It was supposed to happen. It could have happened yesterday was the idea. And so they had to, it was that guy in the trench coat around the corner guy. I mean, it was just that whole back alley thing. And he sets it up with this guy who won't say his name. The compelling moment
who ups the price at the moment that they give him money.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So they've got to go get more money. I mean, they're being conned this whole time, too, because it's illegal.
It's illegal. And the guy knows he has them over a barrel. So they finally get the money. And there's all of this is you're learning about them during their adventures of trying to get more money. They're talking to each other. You're finding out they're very real people. And they're just regular people. Keep in mind, they are also falling in love. That's part of the plot. Is that through this adventure they're falling in love. Yep. But again, they're in this process. So there's a scene. They've got the person who's going to do the procedure. They go to this empty building. It's an
apartment building, but it's condemned. It's condemned. Completely empty.
And so there's glass out of the windows, and there's crap and brick and whatever on the floor. I mean, it's been empty for clearly years.
It's dirty.
It's dirty.
It's not a hospital.
And she goes into one room, and so Steve is there, and they take her into another room that's been cordoned off probably. I guess there was a door there.
Yeah, there was.
But again, it's cold. It's like fall or winter, and there's no heat, there's no air, and it's just this table. You see the guy pull out all of the instruments
that they're going to use. And they tell her to go to the corner and get undressed.
And then she's just supposed to lay on the table. Or was it the floor? The floor. It was a floor with a blanket on it. And, at the last minute, was it a scream first or was it Steve?
She begins to cry. And he can hear her through the door. And so he busts through there, and he's not supposed to.
And what happens is he looks. You see him seeing each facet of the room, the instruments, her crying, the pallet on the floor, the dirt on the floor, the uncaring coldness of the nurse. There's no doctor. We say nurse, I'm putting that in quotes. And he drags her out of there. So that scene to me is the most perfect example. Nobody said, this is what happens when abortion is illegal. List.
And in fact, America didn't know what a world with legal abortion even looked like.
Correct.
I mean, it had never been legal, so it was just
So
but this is the world we're living
people
in.
didn't know what when you say illegal abortions, you don't know what people are talking about.
Yeah.
This didn't talk about it. This showed you.
Yes.
Now, again, he took her out of there, and in the end,
she decides she's going to keep the baby.
She's going to keep the baby.
But she doesn't. She decides that before she and spoiler. Okay, it's called Love with a Proper Stranger,
Correct.
and it's a romantic, and it's actually billed on iTunes as a comedy. It's a romance.
It's a dramedy.
It's a dramedy. It's got its moments, but it's more drama than comedy for me. There are a lot
of funny things. There's a lot of funny lines. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
And
they're charming people.
Oh my God.
And at the end they decide to be together, but not because they have to.
Correct.
She makes the decision that I'm going to be with you because I really am in love with you, and he wants to be with her. Because he does propose out of a sense of obligation.
He gets beat up by her dad.
Yeah, her older brother.
Oh, is it her brother?
My bad.
So. You're right. Yeah. It's her older brothers. Right.
He kind of proposes and is very open about the fact that, I'm just doing this because it's my responsibility. And she was like, well, screw your responsibility. Well,
I think he says it's my mess. I got to clean it up. And she's looking at him going, I'm
not your mess. Yeah, I don't want to be your mess. Like, that is not, no.
So in the end, you have this romantic comedy.
Yeah. And she doesn't get the abortion.
And they got married.
Yes. Well, you assume.
They got married. 63.
But this is the one I was talking about. This is one I alluded to before our break, that I said this is a movie that both sides of the issue could probably leave pretty happy about. Somebody who is anti-abortion would look at this and say, oh, they didn't get the abortion, and,
no, anti-choice. I'm sorry, anti-abortion. Nobody's pro-abortion.
Okay, fine.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but if you're anti-choice, if you're anti-choice, you look at this and say, well, she made the right choice. She shouldn't have chosen, this to begin with. She ended up keeping the baby. They got married. Traditional family values, yada, yada, yada. If you are like you and me, you look at this and say, see, this is why safe and legal abortion has to be a thing.
Because I think it's pro-choice. That's why I say it's not pro-abortion, and pro-choice.
Yep.
She chose not to. Now, granted, she didn't really have a choice because that was unhygienic, that was unsanitary. God knows how, what would have happened to her physically had she gone through it.
Although women did it.
Oh, no, exactly. Totally women did it, and a lot of women died.
And yes.
And so the thing is, yes, it's about making it legal so that women won't die. But as I said, this was a movie not about lecture. This is right. This is right. Yeah. This is wrong. This is wrong. This was about, we're going to show you.
Because both of these characters were kind of united in the idea that this is the best thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't have a psychological or philosophical or moral debate about whether to get an abortion. It was, we need the money and we need to find a person.
Right.
That was the challenge. It wasn't anything where they had scruples that said, are we ending a life, or any of those kinds of things that an anti-choice person would say. This was just more, it's a challenge, but a different kind of challenge.
Just starting. She was just starting her life and didn't feel like she was ready for that yet. She didn't have a husband. She didn't have a boyfriend even when the movie starts. So it's not even an option. And
although she discovers that it is an option once she decides she can't go through with the abortion, she goes, well, I guess this is what I'm going to do.
Correct.
I mean, she decides to keep the baby before she decides she's going to marry this guy.
Correct.
In fact, she turns him down.
She does. She does indeed.
After she's decided to keep the baby.
But it's, as I said, it's one of those where it was more of a show. No, it wasn't a hammer to the head. And I really appreciate that.
And yet it was a very dramatic scene. And it was about what it was about. But by then you were invested in the characters. And really what that scene was about, in addition to how horrific these conditions were, it was about the lengths that he was willing to go to take care of her. When he busts through the door, their relationship moved to a new level in that scene.
And that's a heartbreaking scene because you see, and that's where Steve McQueen was wonderful. You see everything in his face. When he's out there and he can't see anything, but he's hearing, you see his frustration grow and grow. Then when he busts in, that moment when he is looking around and seeing what that room looks like, and then seeing her there in shock. She's clearly in shock at that point. And you see on his face, if he hasn't fallen in love with her, he's certainly on that road.
Yeah.
And he cares for her for sure.
And he cannot let her do this.
And he's not, and it's like, this is not happening this way. This is not going to happen. Yeah. And it's, it's a very, it's kind of a little bit of an alpha moment, for the, guys, because he's like, oh, we're not doing this and I'm taking charge, and he does, whatever. But it was 1963, and if anybody can do that really well, it was Steve McQueen.
That's true. That's true.
So, but as I said, this is one of those that I think they dealt with this subject, and again, Love with a Proper Stranger says nothing about unwed mothers or abortion or anything. It's considered, I guess, a romantic comedy.
It probably felt a little edgy in 63 that this was the setup.
Oh, it would have had to. Well, the setup, maybe. I mean, I don't think any of the promos or anything talked about that she was a girl in trouble, as they said at the time.
No.
It was just a love story, between
But I imagine when
Steve
you walked into the movie and you saw, within 5 minutes you get the setup and you're like, oh.
Correct. Yep. But again, there was a lot of comedy in it, so I get why they did lean
Bill it that way
toward that. But there's a lot of funny things. And
she was nominated for an Oscar for this.
It was great. Yeah. And oh my gosh, seriously, if you just wanted to turn down the sound and look at them, they are just beautiful. They are just beautiful.
Yeah, considering the fact that in this movie she almost marries Bosley from Charlie's Angels.
That's right. I forgot about him.
It was his very first
Poor
movie.
Guy. And that's right, it was introducing.
Yeah. And he was very sweet.
He was
actually,
very sweet. And he was very, and in the end, he was a good.
He was a good guy, but
But so that was. So
but if it's Bosley or Steve McQueen, you're going to go with Steve McQueen.
Even an out of work Steve McQueen. But no, it was, as I said, it's a fun. I think it's a cute movie, and it is a romance. It's totally a romance. Yeah. There are a lot of romantic moments in there. Really nicely written. Great direction. It's just good filmmaking and all across the board. And even though that was not necessarily what the intent was, it was just part of the plot.
But no matter how you feel about this particular hot button issue, it was just presented to you, and you were going to probably feel the way you felt.
It's not a protest movie. It's not one way or the other. It was just saying, this is the story. Yeah. That's what it was. Yeah. And you take from it what you will. To me, it never, until I saw that, and you see it blatantly, that it was this awful room in this condemned building with just a towel.
But
and
again,
it was,
we saw this movie with post Roe v. Wade eyes.
Wiping against my forehead going, phew, thank goodness that's not going on.
Yeah.
But that's why, again,
that's why it's important to not
let the stakes are still high. Correct.
Keep up the fight. Yeah. But at the same time, I think in 63, this wasn't about illegal abortion. This was about abortion. I mean, Correct. This is just, and so I think there might have even been a sense from Natalie Wood and the filmmakers. It's like, abortion is a bad thing to do because it looks like this. But they didn't know that it could look like you go to an actual clinic and you meet with a doctor who uses sterile equipment. Correct. And, they just didn't know that. That was not part of their reality. You have limits
on how late you can do this kind of. I mean, it's not. Anyway, so that was that hot button. Good example.
Pretty hot. That button.
But it was good. It was that's a good example. If you're like, I'm looking for a movie about abortion. If you're like, nobody does that. Who does that?
Well, they did make that
for a movie about racism.
Remember If These Walls Could Talk?
No.
Do you remember that? Oh my God, that was a TV. No, there's a TV movie that was made, and it was in vignettes. I remember Demi Moore was in one vignette. Cher was in a vignette, and I think Anne Heche was in another one.
I don't know what you're talking about.
It was a television movie, and it was focused on the topic of abortion, and so they had like these short films about, and it was in the 80s.
I have never heard of this in my damn life.
I'm gonna have to IMDb it. We'll have to I'll throw up an IMDb or a trailer or something onto Facebook.
Okay, we have one more that is actually one more hot topic. It's really specific.
But okay, so I'll give you a hint. Being raised in a Catholic family, this was a big hot button issue for us.
What could it be about?
Well, Catholics have a lot of hot buttons, so it could be a couple of things. But we'll find out what it's all about after the break.
Open wide. It's your prescribed dose of Poperation with Eric and Stacey.
And we're back. talking about hot button issues here on Pop-Oration. I'm Stacey.
I am Eric, and our next topic is all about priests who do horrible things to children.
I'm calling them religious ne'er-do-wells.
Oh, you're so saucy.
I'm so saucy and Edwardian.
I just call them a bunch of pedophiles and clerical collars.
Oh my gosh.
They're just, and okay, so I was raised Catholic.
Yes, you were.
I was moved around a lot as a kid. I was in a military family. Most of the priests that I knew were also military chaplains, which probably had something to do with this. I never had an encounter with a pedophile priest in my life as a child. And I met a lot of priests, but it is an issue within the Catholic Church. I mean, the numbers are staggering when you see the amount of, and especially not so much the number of pedophile priests, but the amount of victims they are able to rack up when you have an institution like the Catholic Church that just moves them around from place to place to place to place to place. Yes.
They're enabled to do this. I think that's the part of the problem is it's a culture that is enabling. But I think that there are people that are just bad or they have DNA, it's one of those where that's not true. I think there is something, they have biologically, there's something there, and then the environmental around it.
Yeah, and it also doesn't help that within the Catholic tradition, like priests are literally holier than thou. I mean, they
put on a pedestal.
They have got the right ear of God, and so it's like they can also get away with stuff. And if a priest tells you to do something, you do it
because it's from God. Because he is from God. Yeah. Anyway, so these are two movies,
and then we wanted to give a nod to a documentary series that's
it's
new
this summer.
And it's so good.
This summer, it's been hot.
So the movies that we wanted to talk about, it was kind of a split between it. Let's just do both. Doubt, that came out in 2008, Philip Seymour Hoffman and Meryl Streep and Amy Adams, and a beautiful cameo by Viola Davis in this movie. And then Spotlight, which is a completely different take on the whole thing. It's about a team of investigative reporters that first blew open the story in Boston, in the Boston Globe. Doubt is about, so the two leads are Meryl Streep as an older nun and Philip Seymour Hoffman as a younger
And I would say
priest.
Doubt is more subtle in plot.
Yes.
Then, because it's not necessary. Spotlight is just about them finding out about what was going on. Whereas
and really Spotlight is about a free press and why it's important to have a free press. The topic of their investigation just happens to be pedophilia within the Catholic Church, but it does get into how deep this ran and how they thought this was a local story and it went all the way to the Vatican. Doubt is this story of an older nun, as I said, and a younger priest at a are they at a school?
I think so.
Yeah, so it's a school environment, And Meryl Streep becomes convinced that the priest, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, is a pedophile. And this is taking place during the 60s.
Yes.
So it's way before the Boston Globe broke up in a story about this. And she is doing what she can to undermine his credibility and try to get him away from the school and get him repositioned elsewhere. Throughout the entire thing, and this is based on a play, by the way, by John Patrick Shanley, who's a favorite playwright of mine, wrote some great stuff, Italian-American Reconciliation, Doubt, some other really fantastic work there. And throughout the entire thing, is spoiler, non-spoiler, is that you never really find out whether or not he's guilty.
Well, that's the whole point. Is there doubt here? You doubt whether she's right. You doubt whether he is. He
protests his innocence the entire time, and she is convinced that he's guilty. Almost the entire time. And Amy Adams plays a young nun who's just kind of caught in the middle and at first just can't believe that, how could you make such an accusation against Father so-and-so? Because again, right next to God. And yet we all know that priests did do this at some point. So this is a period piece. I mean, it wasn't created in the 60s. It's about the 60s.
Right.
And so it's just but it doesn't, again, it doesn't hit you over the head with this is a terrible thing to do to children. It kind of takes for granted this is a terrible thing to do to children.
Right.
The point is, did he do it or not?
Right. And thus the title Doubt, which, as I said, is perfect because you end up doubting everything.
Yeah.
You doubt what you hear them say. Doubt what you see. One thing that stood out was the long nails. The long fingernails. That is the most creepy thing to me. And I remember that and going, yeah, he's guilty just for that. No, that's not true. But that was, as I said, that just creeped me out. That has nothing to do with anything.
Well, and it probably, but it might have been there to be creepy. You know what I mean?
It is there. That's exactly, because it's in the play.
Yeah.
And it's a detail that the writer put in there, and I think it's important.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting. We talked about race earlier with Get Out. One of the interesting things about the play is that the play only has 4 actors in the entire play. So it's the Meryl Streep character, the Philip Seymour Hoffman character, the Amy Adams character, and the Viola Davis character. Viola Davis plays this young boy's mother. And when you watch the play, mostly because you're watching 3 white actors up there, and you just kind of, most people just assume that a Catholic boys' school in the 60s is going to be mostly full of white kids, either Irish or Italian. When you finally hear, we're going to talk to this boy's mother, all of a sudden the scene opens up and there's this black woman on stage and she's the mom. Now, in the movie, you actually got to see this boy, towards the beginning. So you were aware that this is a young African-American boy. But the scene between Meryl Streep and the mother of this young child is heartbreaking. And it's one scene in a fairly long play. On stage, and she's not in the movie much more than that. Got an Oscar nomination for this one scene because she's Viola Davis and she's amazing.
And she deserves it.
But really, it's kind of this sense of, when Meryl Streep as this nun informs this woman, I think your son is being raped by a priest, she kind of goes, okay. And you're like, but you're a mother, and the whole thing is, it's like, this is a priest who is taking a shine to my boy, and even if he's being abused, what's the other option for him? He's a young black boy in Baltimore. In the 60s. And it's like, if this priest can help him get ahead, maybe we'll just take what we can get. And it's horrifying, it's heartbreaking. And she doesn't, you think the whole scene is going to be this whole thing about denial, and it's not. It's just,
acceptance.
And
I think that, again, what we talk about is you see what the consequences are. This is what shines the light on what the issue is. And I say it's shining a light on, bringing us to Spotlight.
Yes.
Which was about reporters' search for the truth.
And how difficult it was.
And
if there's any agenda in Spotlight, it's really, as I said, about advocating for a free press.
About a free press.
And resources to journalism for journalists who need to take a long-term investigative story.
Correct.
Because it took them years to unlock this before they could put anything in print, because they just didn't have the sources, and it was all hunches for the longest time. But again, it just by putting the issue of pedophilia within the Catholic Church just slightly off to the side, this could have been a story about, and it's a true story, but it could have been a story about a bunch of investigative reporters really investigating anything. They could have been investigating the mob or just anything else. We just take for granted that this is a bad thing to do. But what it did reveal about that scandal is just how deep it went, and how the institution of the Catholic Church was really enabling so much of this abuse.
So again, it wasn't about the actual act of. It was about the domino effect and the consequences, the ramifications of this going on.
And the amount of stick-to-itiveness and bravery it took to actually unlock that.
Correct. Which also leads us into the TV documentary that was so hot. And again, I got in on the train late because that's how I roll. But it was The Keepers.
Yes.
And we've mentioned this before. It was on the binging stuff. But it's a documentary. It's on Netflix. And I think it's 7 or 8. 7. No, it's 7 because here's why I know. Okay, what's the first episode? Because everybody's talking about it. So I'm like, fine, I'll watch the first episode. Ostensibly, it started out as these 2 women who were in their
60s,
late 50s, early, mid 60s, about 10 years older than me. That tells you how old I am. Do your math. In the late 60s, they were at this Catholic school in Baltimore, and a nun that was a teacher there went missing, and then her body was found. And nobody ever, it's still an unsolved case. So they decided, they were both retired, and they had time, and they said, we've got the internet now. Why don't we see if we can figure out what happened to Sister Kathy?
Yep.
So they started a Facebook page called What Happened to Sister Kathy? And it just domino affected into people came forward, more information. And so what looked like this straight up mystery of this murder mystery took a really severe turn into Baltimore's Catholic diocese cover-up.
Yes.
And so I watched episode 1, and it was so compelling. I think I watched it. It was like on a Friday night. Episode 1 was great. It was so compelling. I'm fascinated. I'm like,
what happened to Sister Kathy?
I love a murder mystery. And these two little ladies are fabulous.
Yes.
And they're just...
Again, this kind of reminds me of our conversation we had about Happy Valley. People you rarely get to see on TV.
Oh, yeah. You would never see these people. These are your... Seriously, this is you know, so-and-so down the street. These are these little ladies, retired, that you would never blink twice at. So, 10 o'clock, I start second episode.
And the shit hits the fan in the second episode.
I was a little... it was a little upsetting, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to watch one more because it was only 11 at that time. The third episode, I believe, is the one that was so disturbing that I was freaking out. I was freaking the hell out. Yep. Okay. So now it's midnight. I'm exhausted, but I'm freaking out. I can't go to bed now because of what I just saw. Yep. So I watched one more.
Because you think episode 4 out of 7 is going to give you closure?
I thought maybe they'd make it a little happier. Oh my God. But wow. I will say this, 4 was better than 3. 3 blew my mind.
3 is where you find out just how sociopathic some of these abusers can be.
Awful.
Yeah.
So 4 was better. And so then I took a break for like 2 weeks.
Before you went back to the final 3.
Before I went back, and then I watched the final 3, and it was great. But so here is this documentary again. It was a well done documentary. And again, this is not fiction, so it's a little different from what we've talked about previous. But it was a documentary that showed. And again, it started. Oh my gosh, the editing and the direct, of how they put it together was brilliant because it started out one way.
There is an art. There is an art to the documentary,
and this proves it beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, because you don't know the scope of what you're entering into when you watch the first episode.
They just created a Facebook page, and they're 2 little retirees. It was adorable. It was not adorable.
Well, by the time it got to, although, the woman who you meet, her name is Jean, who is the first woman who...
Jane Doe?
She was the Jane Doe.
Oh, my gosh.
What I came across from her, one, Glenn Close needs to play her when this gets turned into a movie because they're
better
like
do it.
Dead ringers.
I mean, yeah.
Dead ringers.
Let's do it now.
2, she endured so much trauma.
It's
from this horrible man and his accomplice. There were 2 priests kind of, arranged for this all to happen. And yet she emerges from this whole thing really as a fully formed human being. She's not depicted simply as a product of her trauma. Does that make sense?
It does. Correct. She lived through, and again, it's that thing about how you don't want to be seen as the victim all your life. Yeah. You want to come through it. That was something that happened to you, and but it's not who you are. Yeah. And I think that's what she did. I will tell you. So basically, for a long time, that memory had been blocked out of her head of what had happened to her at this high school back in the late 60s. She went on after she was graduated, and she went to college, and she got married, and she had kids. The man she married, he was wonderful. Yeah. And it's one of those where a lot of times victims, women and men, they're not able to ever have a really decent relationship romantically because they don't know how. Because they've had this awful thing.
And there's no trust. I mean, they've been they've been abused.
But she had found this man who was wonderful. Unfortunately, he died. He had cancer or something. Yep. But he was through with a lot of the stuff she had to go through, especially the legal stuff. He was there for her. He was very supportive. And she was very, very lucky to have that kind of support system, because a lot of women do not, and that's why a lot of times they don't come forward. The victims don't come forward. Sure. They don't have the support.
Yeah, there's this really touching moment where now, and I'm not advocating that you should be a virgin until you get married. Like, that's not what I'm about to say. But there was this
that was going to make me laugh if you did.
Yeah, there was this lovely moment where she's talking to her. She's recalling this conversation with her husband. he said to her, as far as I'm concerned, I'm the first one you were ever with because these men abused you. They didn't love you. This wasn't, this wasn't sex the way that we talk about sex, and he understood the difference between those two things. And that was, and when she recalls that moment and when he said that to her, and that's what I mean. It's like, she had this whole life after she was horrifically abused, and it does not shy away from the horrificness of the abuse, but she does emerge as a person, as they all do.
Right. And I think, again, good documentary filmmaking, that we have these characters and they are, we get them full color. We understand them. We know a little bit more about these little ladies, but we also, a lot of the other women that come to the forefront, we find out more about them. And so at the end, I was angry. I was angry at Baltimore, frankly. Politicians and the Catholic Church in Baltimore. Yep. I was just disgusted. And frankly, some of our Maryland state legislators, too.
Yes.
To be quite honest. But anyway, it's compelling and it's well worth it. I don't think you can... Well, I'm sure there are people that sat and watched all 7. It would be very, very hard to do. Yes. It was excruciating, frankly.
I think I watched the entire thing in 3 days.
Yeah, I couldn't do it.
In 3 different sittings.
But again, that's what, the binge thing, you can take a break, whatever. But it was definitely worth it.
Poperation highly recommends The Keepers.
Yeah. But also Spotlight is good, and Doubt. And again, all of this on religious ne'er-do-wells.
Yeah.
And
so my final diagnosis, I think, on this whole issue of hot button topics is it started off with, show, don't tell. And I think that's still really good advice for any filmmaker or artist who wants to address.
Give us a good story. Give us characters we care about. Then you can put in what their issues were, what their trials were. Yeah. But give us good characters that we like.
But also just set that issue just slightly to the side. Not that you avoid it.
Right. Okay,
but make the journey of the movie something about, did he or didn't he? Not, this is a horrible thing to do to children. Or, make it about, is he going to be able to get out of this house? Not, aren't they treating black people terribly? You kind of, if you have a real strong point of view about it, you take that for granted, but then you put a compelling story with a yes or a no that we can actually get invested in around it, and you end up with this thing that just makes so much more of a powerful statement than just a piece of cheap propaganda.
Correct. I agree. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. I think so. I think that it comes down to make a good film, have a good story, have good characters. And I think you're right. Don't lecture us, show us. But and I think whatever your that issue is, it does. It needs to be maybe a little bit to the side. It doesn't need to be straight on, because that would get tedious and you can get cliched and hackneyed at that point. So anyway, but these are good. As I said, I think these are good examples of these hot buttons.
Of doing it right.
Of doing it right.
Yeah.
So it can be done.
Let's talk about something lighter and more fun the next time, Stacey. I mean, I've had a great time this week. Don't get me wrong, but
we'll lighten it up next week. I don't know what we'll do.
I don't know what we'll do.
I don't know.
But it'll be something
a little.
Yeah.
So this is Poperation. Subscribe if you like us. Comment whether you like us or not. Let us know your thoughts. We are on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, iHeartRadio.
We're also on Facebook and Twitter.
We are on Facebook and Twitter. And we also have on our website, as well as our current, all of our episodes. We also have a blog. And we have some interesting trailers, movie trailers, and other videos down there that you might find interesting.
Believe it or not, we have other jobs.
We have
in addition to all of that.
I know, it's crazy. So thanks again. I'm Stacey.
I'm Eric.
You've been listening to Poperation with Eric and Stacey. Check out our website at poperationroom.com for links to our blog and other extras. Don't forget to subscribe to Poperation via iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, and other podcast locations. You can also follow @PoperationRoom on Facebook and Twitter. Music provided by PurplePlanet.com.